Hey, greetings, gang, and welcome to our leadership class and looking at the second key characteristic of leadership, identified as priorities. So today we're going to kind of do an evaluation assessment of priorities and how we prioritize our time, our activities, and our responsibilities. Hopefully this is helpful information as we continue to walk through these subjects. So, there are two things that are most difficult to get people to do, and that is to think and to do things in order of importance. Practical people know how to get what they want, philosophers know what they ought to want, but leaders know how to get what they ought to want. That may seem obvious, but again, it's a real assessment of recognizing what is the priorities, what are those things that we need to get done. Success can be defined as the progressive realization of a predetermined goal. You may have heard of this gentleman named Pareto, but probably not by his name. The Pareto principle is also known as the 80-20 principle. And so I assume that some of us have probably have heard this, and let me explain what that really means. Really created by Pareto back in 1897. Give me examples of that. First of all, from a time perspective, 20% of our time produces 80% of our results. We have a high productive time in our lives, and that usually is about 20% of the time of the day. From a counseling perspective, 20% of people take up 80% of our time. In products, 20% of the products bring 80% of the profit. That is clearly true in most companies. When it comes to reading, 20% of books contain 80% content or valued content in them. From a job market, 20% of work gives us 80% of our satisfaction. You know, there are a lot of things that we do in our jobs that aren't really satisfying, but there's 20% of that work that is very satisfying. When it comes to speeches, 20% of the presentation produces about 80% of the impact. You know, if you can take a nugget or two away from anybody's presentation, you're probably doing well. Donations, 20% of the people give 80% of the money. That is clearly true in many of the nonprofit organizations that I've been a part of. From leadership, 20% of the people make 80% of the decisions. You get a select few that are making the decisions for the majority. And then when it comes to a picnic, 20% of the people will eat 80% of the food. I like that comment by John Maxwell. So what are these strategies for this 80-20 principle that we want to pay attention to? First of all, who are our top 20 producers? You want to spend 80% of your time with those 20% to be able to maximize the effectiveness of the things that you're doing and they're doing. You want to spend 80% of your money on that 20%. You know, whether it's volunteers or part of your team, there are folks that kind of rise above and do more than the standard group of people. Determine what per 20% of the work that gives you 80% of the return and train an assistant to do the other 80%. That's a rather telling kind of thing. Some of us have the capacity to do that, some of us don't. You want to ask your top 20% to train the next 20%. So that 80-20 principle has a great application for us when it comes to our priorities. Efficiency is the foundation for survival. Effectiveness is the foundation for success. We teach what we know, but we reproduce what we are. We have a saying we use a lot in our household. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. In other words, those within our leadership team will repeat the things that they see, not the things that they're told. So we need to reproduce ourselves by the things that we prioritize. So pay attention to those as we lead. It's not how hard you work, but rather how smart you work. And here's a few phrases that I would like for us to stand out. I'm going to ask you this on a quiz a little bit later, so make sure you identify these. First of all, you need to organize or you're going to agonize. Identify the things that have high importance and high urgency. And then secondly, high importance and low urgency. Then low importance and high urgency, then low importance and low urgency. We often spend way too much time on mundane kind of things that really aren't effective for the things that we do in our days. Some of that's Facebook, or just searching on the web or Instagram. You need to be careful and guard your most efficient time and to be able to do your most activities during those particular times. Secondly, you need to choose or lose. Everyone is either an initiator or a reactor. It's not will my calendar be filled, but rather who will fill my calendar. Not will I see people, but who will I see? And the idea here is just to be able to be the initiator. You choose. You set out your week and identify where are my priorities of who I need to see this week. And granted, you do need to leave time for the reactors or those things that might come your way, but you want to be intentional about where you're spending your time and who you're spending it with. When it comes to leaders versus reactors, we know that leaders will initiate. They identify those that they want to pay attention to or connect with. They will also make the contact, be intentional about who they need to see. They'll anticipate problems, they'll invest in people, and they'll fill their calendars with priorities. Whereas reactors have a tendency just to react. They're waiting for things to happen as opposed to being intentional. They wait for contact. They react to problems. They don't anticipate them. They spend time with people, rather invest in them, or they fill their calendar by requests. So there's a real difference between a leader and a reactor in terms of how priorities laid out. Thirdly, here you want to evaluate or stalemate. Evaluating priorities is a must. You want to be able to identify what you need to ask. Is first of all, what is required of me? What are your top 3 or 4 priorities in the coming week or even in the coming day, depending on the circumstance? What gives me the greatest return of the things that I get to do? And what am I doing that I do best? And I'm spending most of my time doing that. There are 3 common problems in these kind of areas. First of all, there's abuse. Too few doing too much. We see that so often that there's not enough of people pulling their weight. There's disuse. Too many people doing too little. See this in many churches and congregations. Or there's misuse. Too many doing the wrong things. Ecclesiastes 4:9 has some good wisdom for us, where Solomon wrote, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their work. Again, so being intentional about what you're doing and how you're doing it. So what's required of me, what gives me the greatest return, and then thirdly, what is the most rewarding? What is something that you like to do? Try to figure out how to spend most of your time doing that. Learn to do it so well that people will pay you for it. So requirement, return, and reward. These are 3 things that you definitely want to pay attention to as you think about putting your weeks or months calendars and responsibilities together. So here's a priority principle. Priorities never stay put. They change. Every month you need to evaluate your 3 R's. Return, reward, or requirement, return, and reward. Evaluate and assess those. Ask, what am I doing that I can be done by someone else? That I can give and delegate those responsibilities elsewhere. And then what are the top projects that you're doing this month, and how long will it take to get those done? And so again, being able to do an assessment of that will help you in terms of those requirements, those returns, and those rewards. You cannot overestimate the unimportance of practically everything. That's a great quote that's identified. It said, oftentimes we spend too much doing too little. Practice the art of knowing what to overlook, things that you don't have to give attention to. And so, again, this does take practice because we have a tendency to, again, just to respond to the tyranny of the urgent and only do what's in front of us. The petty and the mundane occupy way too much of our time. Again, sometimes that's just vegging out in front of the TV or in front of the computer, just watching dumb videos. Yes, they're fun. It's okay to do that on a limited scale, but give yourself designated time. I'm going to take a 10-minute break here and do this. But we often find ourselves 2 and 3 hours later still doing the same stupid things. Tony Campolo, who's a sociologist, he studied 95-year-olds, and they asked the question, if you had to live your life over again, what would you do differently? Well, the first thing they says, I would reflect more. Spend some time just thinking about what am I doing and why am I doing it. I would risk more, looking for those opportunities as they come and thinking about, should I go in that direction? And lastly, I would do more things that would live on after I am dead, and looking for those legacy kind of things. Normally, if we had a time in class, I can't seem to get the video to work here this morning. But I would show you one of the ways that I like to risk is I've gone skydiving 3 different times. I've done it with a very good friend of mine whom I just had breakfast with this morning. And then I've taken each of my kids on a 10,000-foot drop with a tandem drop. And again, it's just a blast to do that. And if we get a chance, I'll show it in class. But just again, to take the risk of doing some things that are adventurous. I love to get high on life, so to speak, is a phrase that we've used in our lives. Know that the good is the enemy of the best. It's a great phrase to recognize the things that we need to do differently. Break the tie between two goods. Ask a colleague, what do they think in terms of this or that? Can one be handled by someone else? Which option would be one of more benefit to the people involved? And then make decisions based on your purpose or reason for being. I have a video here, a clip. Let's see if we can get this to work. It's about a decision that needs to be made between a Navy ship and somebody he's talking to on the radio. Check this out.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
Son, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is the lighthouse, mate. It's your call.
I love it. Yeah, very appropriate when you think about the things that need to be done in making decisions. So when you think about the roles that we play, decisions that need to be made. All right, sorry about that. Got that figured out. So again, making a decision between 2 good things right now that are an important part of that process of identifying our priorities. Again, knowing when to say no and knowing when to say yes is also a big part of this. You can't have it all. You need to choose necessity as part of the game. Choosing necessity is part of the game. There's a great story about a climber who was going to climb Mount Blanc with a group of people, and he was determined that he was going to have a picnic on the top. Well, the guides had said, no, you only need to take the bare necessities. And this guy had a bottle of wine, some cheese, a blanket, and glasses, whatnot. Well, as the story goes, as they were making the climb up the mountain, and he kind of set out ahead of the group. Little by little, you kept seeing a little bit of cheese here, some bread, and then the bottle of wine and a blanket, along the path as he was climbing. Just did not follow direction. So choosing necessity is part of every one of our games. Too many priorities paralyze us, so we need to learn to say no. You need to practice it. There was an old set of commercials that David Spade used to run. They were practicing saying no. For some of us, we need to say no, or learn to say it. I just was having this conversation with a friend just recently. Is their tendency is to want to respond to all the requests that come along. That's just not realistic, nor is it helpful or wise. And so be cognizant about your abilities to be able to say no as often as you possibly can. When little priorities demand too much of us, big problems arise. And so be aware of those kind of things. You got to be able to establish and stay focused on what it is that you're called to do. 7, time deadlines and emergencies force us to prioritize. You've got deadlines of when assignments are due, when tests are happening, and so on and so forth. So part of that is to also identify when is your most productive time. I know for me, the mornings are the most productive time for me. I'm far more engaged in the morning than I am later in the afternoon or in the evenings. So give your highest priorities your most productive time. An important principle there. So here's a question for you to respond to, and here's a prompt for you. What 3 things do you need to do today, and when can you do them? I want you to identify those as priorities. Okay? So, there you go. Priorities. Great lesson for us. Is something we're going to have to constantly come back to. And we'll take some time to talk about this in class. So, thanks for taking the opportunity to listen to this. And let's make sure you respond to the prompt that's below. Thanks.